The Oslo Center for Peace and Human Rights U.S. Foundation participates in the Fourth World Conference on Remedies to Racial and Ethnic Economic Inequality. Leaders and public policymakers examined successful solutions to racial and ethnic inequality. They asked, does it work? If so, why? If not, why not? Will it work for groups in other countries? Roy Wilkins Center for Human Relations and Social Justice Director Samuel L. Myers, Jr., Ph.D., organized and convenes the conference.
We are fortunate to have gathered top policymakers, researchers, analysts, and others to learn more about their views and the results of their pioneering research on narrowing racial and ethnic economic gaps. The conference will begin today not as a singular occurrence, but as a part of a continuum. The first World Conference on Remedies to
Augsburg College President Paul Pribbenow reminds us of the centrality of economic and ethnic equality.
I wanted to bring an official welcome to all of you here. We are so proud of the partnership that has evolved over the past several years between Augsburg, which, as many of you know, is directly across the street, and especially the Humphrey School, as we're working on many fronts to think about the intersecting values and commitments that we have as educational institutions. Most of you are aware that we right here in Cedar Riverside. Yesterday, several of us were just across the street at the Riverside Plaza, these iconic buildings that are located here at the end of our street. These buildings have gone through a $150 million renovation over the past couple of years for the residents of that building. As most of you know, the population of those plaza facilities at this point are primarily Somali Americans, refugees, immigrants who have come to this country. The largest population of Somalis outside of Mogadishu. And as I listened yesterday to the celebration of the renovation that's happened there, yes, new plumbing and new electricity and all of the things that help to increase the quality of life, what I truly heard was the ways in which the residents of this facility have engaged with the city and the county and the state and the federal government to think about being partners in the work of creating a community, creating a quality of life, creating economic opportunities for the residents there that truly is a microcosm of the kinds of challenges that we all face. And so we don't have to go far to find the centrality of these questions in our life here in Cedar Riverside as we face around the world. And here at the Humphrey School, as you know, we now co-host the Nobel Peace Prize Forum. The Peace Prize will be awarded tomorrow in Norway, and we will celebrate the 25th anniversary of that coming here in March 2013, where our guests will be Mrs. Karman from Yemen and Mr. Yunus from Bangladesh. So a wonderful celebration. But the truth is, our connections to Norway could be seen as nostalgic only. We can only celebrate those traditional crafts. And one of the things that we've lifted up in our work over the past several years is, in fact, the relevance of Norway to our work. And it seems to me especially appropriate that Prime Minister Bondevik is here this morning because he is in many ways an emblem of the work that Norway is doing in the world to create peace, to create justice, to create and respond to human rights. And in that way, there could be no more relevant message for our students as we send them out into the world. So it's a great pleasure to welcome you all this morning and to have a chance to be here as we hear from Prime Minister Bondevik. Thank you.
Director Samuel L. Myers introduces Kjell Magne Bondevik, former Norwegian Prime Minister and Oslo Center for Peace and Human Rights, Norway, founder.
It is now my distinct honor to introduce the former Prime Minister of Norway and the founder and president of the Oslo Center for Peace and Human Rights, Kjell Magne Bondevik. Established in 2006, the Oslo Center for Peace and Human Rights promotes democracy, human rights, and interfaith and intercultural dialogue. The Oslo Center also redefined the way we think about emerging democracies where human rights and dialogue are necessary pillars for building sustainable societies. The Oslo Center also works closely with Kenya, Somalia, and Sudan in order to establish strong democratic institutions. Mr. Bondevik has played a vital role in the political life of Norway since 1969, when he became the deputy member of Norway's parliament. After holding several cabinet posts, he served as the Prime Minister of Norway from 1997 to 2000, and again as the Prime Minister of Norway from 2001 to 2005. Immediately following his second term as Prime Minister, Mr. Kjell Magne Bondevik was appointed the United Nations Secretary General's Special Humanitarian Envoy for the Horn of Africa. He served there from 2006 and 2007 in response to the recurrent drought and food insecurity devastating that part of the world. You will see throughout the day that Mr. Bondevik is on the schedule 3 times. He will give this morning's keynote address. He will lead the first panel, and he will speak again at this afternoon's luncheon. We are extremely honored to have so much of the former Prime Minister's time today. Please welcome Kjell Magne Bondevik.
Former Norwegian Prime Minister and Oslo Center for Peace and Human Rights Norway founder Kjell Magne Bondevik introduces the Oslo Center and discusses the importance of gender engagement in reducing inequality.
Thank you so much, and thank you for giving me and the Oslo Center this opportunity to speak about building social and political stability through collective partnership and gender engagement. And after my speech, we will follow up with the panel discussions with other Norwegians as well participating. The Oslo Center shall contribute to responsible leadership in fragile states and weak democracies. Responsible leadership is leadership by example. Exercising a commitment to dialogue and political cooperation and promotion of human rights and democratic principles. Fragile states and weak democracies are to be understood as states that are vulnerable to internal conflicts, that are characterized by political, ethnic, and religious divides, and weak state policies and institutions, and or states where democratic praxis has yet to gain a strong foothold. In this regard, the Oslo Center will contribute by, first, providing context-sensitive advice to political leaders, parties, and the government apparatus on power sharing, coalition building, and enhancement of a culture of dialogue and cooperation based on democratic principles. And second, providing documentation, awareness raising, and competence enhancement on international human rights standards, obligations, and instrument to political leaders, the government apparatus, and the judiciary. And third, providing meeting places and facilitating dialogues. It is a special challenge to involve more women in the political processes. We admire female political strong leaders such as Aung San Suu Kyi from Burma, but the truth is that in most developing countries and fragile states, women are not allowed to play the role they should do. Let me share with you my own experiences from Norway. My political activism started in the beginning of the 70s, when the question of women's rights was high on the political agenda home in Norway. the movement was growing and feminism became a term of importance, both internally in my own Christian Democratic Party and in public life in general. I met women concerned about gender roles and women's right to participate in public life. These women made me realize the importance of women's participation in public life. I was quite young at the time, which may have opened my eyes to new perspectives and new realities. Today, equality of gender participation in government is a matter of course in Norway. And the idea of inequality seems foreign and strange. However, this is a result of changes in norms and values and achieved through legislation and hard work over many years. In my second government period, we proposed changes in gender legislation in Norway. The state secretary in my office worked with and for equality issues, and among other things ensured at least a 40-60 distribution of men and women in all public committees and boards. An important part of my government's policy of development cooperation included aid, especially directed towards women. Women are still much more likely than men to be poor, but aid directed towards women represents an effort to make up for some of the structural differences the sexes in some countries, and make women able to rise up and improve their position in the society. It is not, however, until women possess important leadership positions in society that the real difference can begin to be permanently reduced. In that regard, I believe that gender quotas are necessary to promote women participation in public life, at least in periods of transition. We have extensive equal rights laws accumulated over several years in gender equality legislation. Norway was the first country in the world with an equal rights director, an ombud, as an institutionalized watchdog for equal rights. A law was passed in 2005 that orders that all business boards with more than 4 members need to have at least a 40-60 representation of men and women. There are numerous supportive arrangements to help women combine family and work. One of the best known arrangements is a financial support, including a quite extensive paid leave after childbirth. And this extends to men as well. The family can decide who can best care for the children at home. In addition, education, training, and competence building for women are important factors in this regard. If you neglect women's importance, you throw away half of the world's human leadership resources. This realization may be the key to increased awareness among male leaders about women's participation. Male leaders need to address these issues because this is also their fight. Male leaders themselves will benefit from women participation. So men, it's time to stand up for the women. some words about fragile states. Fragile states, that is, states with high levels of internal conflict, or states in a post-conflict situation with weak state policies and institutions. They will often have unstable coalition governments where power is shared between political parties, ethnic clans, and other actors in a power-sharing arrangement. Such coalition governments may well be the result of political compromises and deals to end violent conflict, and often lack a common political platform. Generally speaking, fragile states and weak democracies often have a short history of political cooperation and democratic governance. In such states, strong group interests often constitute platform for political mobilization. Non-partisan civil society organizations are weak, and the competence and the resources to develop political solutions that gain broad support are limited. The ability to foster political solutions to the benefit of the people, to deliver services, and to provide sufficient voice and accountability is a necessity, both for the government's legitimacy and for general confidence in democracy as a political system. In many volatile political situations, cooperation between the parties to a power-sharing arrangement is also the sole guarantee against recurring and violent conflicts. Such cooperation may also be a precondition for a successful post-conflict reconciliation. Efforts at enhancing political cooperation in divided and conflict-ridden societies are, therefore, a means to conflict prevention and to reconciliation. As an independent organization, the Oslo Center can play a role that is sometimes difficult for states to fill. However, we are a small organization and will not go about our task alone. We work, therefore, in partnership and seek to complement the efforts of governments, other non-governmental organizations, the United Nations, and research institutions. We rely, as a small organization, on strong partners with regard to our democracy projects, and we work especially in partnership with organizations like National Democratic Institute, NDI, International IDEA, and Club de Madrid. Club de Madrid is an organization of more than 80 former presidents and prime ministers working for democracy, and I'm a member myself. The work towards democracies involves many different actors, but the main initiator for change is the local stakeholders, who both carry the responsibility of initiation as well as remaining engaged in the process working towards change. Our role, together with the international community, is to support such a development. For greater change, single initiative can do little, but with a joint effort, a coordinated effort built on collaboration, also the Oslo Center believes that accomplishments can be made. As we are moving forward in the work in countries such as Kenya, South Sudan, and as mentioned already, Somalia, we can yet identify a need to both facilitate coordination as well as to create mechanisms supporting collaboration. As a small organization working from the privileged north, we recognize the need to anchor the work in the form of partnership. The Oslo Center has, through its work, experienced positive changes towards democracy and recognizes that women are playing a central role when reforming a society. They are many times the initiator of change, but are deprived space at the negotiating table. I have participated in projects in several countries at the Horn of Africa for empowering women to take part in public life and get leading positions. By coming together, having workshops, discussing common challenges, they are now in a better position to take leading roles. I have participated in such projects in countries like Uganda, Kenya, and Somalia. The exclusion of women in reconciliation and peace processes is not only unjust, as women are 50% of the population, but also a loss for the country itself. The country's political and economic discussions are deprived of the perspectives of both genders that might be crucial to create opportunities for change. If women, who often are the main caretakers, are not involved in change, the opportunity for including the next generation to think in democratic terms is a lost opportunity. When countries move towards democracy, it is important to stress inclusion in the talks and in action. Women and men, young and old, geographical, ethnic, and religious groups, all equally included, not only represented, but having their voices heard at the table in the process. And this is a process that the Oslo Center supports. We do it both in terms of encouragement to governments and partners to adopt a gender equal approach, but also we do it through our own programmatic work. We seek representation of women to develop a gender perspective, taking into consideration women's particular interests and concerns. In Somalia, for instance, the Oslo Center has worked actively to support organic growth of the political associations and parties. The Oslo Center has offered advice and meeting places to discuss internal party democracy and party system. They are on the way now to establish political parties in Somalia, and they have the ambition to have the next general election based on political parties, not on ethnic clans. In that regard, the Oslo Center has made efforts to include women in the discussion by encouraging party leaders to appoint women as participants, while paying attention to the specific concerns that women have raised, not only as women, but as citizens of equal importance and contributors to the development of the country. Let me, in this regard, point out some important measures that should be secured in legislations and policies in order to promote gender equality. All persons, men and women, are equal before the law and are entitled without any discrimination to the equal protection of the law. In this respect, the law must prohibit any discrimination and guarantee to all persons equal and effective protection against discrimination of any ground, such as race, color, sex, language, religion, different political opinions, national or social origin, property, birth, or other status. And second, everybody shall have an equal right to elect the members of the general representative bodies and to stand for election as a member of those bodies. And three, all citizens, men and women, shall have the right to participate in public affairs and to enjoy political rights, including the right to vote, to be elected, and to run for office. And fourth, the state shall take all appropriate measures to eliminate discrimination against women in order to ensure to them equal rights with men in the field of education. 5, fair wages and equal remuneration for work without distinctions of any kind, in particular, women being guaranteed conditions of work not inferior to those enjoyed by men, with equal pay for equal work. And 6, the state shall take all appropriate measures to eliminate discrimination against women in the field of health care in order to ensure, on the basis of equality between men and women, access to health care services, including those related to family planning. And 7, everyone, men and women, have the right to social security. And 8, forced labor, slavery, slave trade, trafficking in women and children, and sex trade shall be prohibited. Legislation only gets you so far. It has to be followed up with actual praxis. Male leaders are in the positions to make these changes. Women should be included in the typical male networks. Male leaders need to take responsibility for promoting women's participation in these frameworks. Male leaders need, when leadership positions are handed out through friends, colleagues, and networks of men, women will not be informed about those positions. Male leaders have a responsibility to include women in their boards and important leading positions. Male leaders can contribute to increase women's participation in public life, if there is a will to do it. There are more women than men who feel excluded and who experience harassment at work. Why is it so? What can be done to change this? You must have strong legislation in this matter. And leaders must address conflicts and incidents of harassment. The culture you find in private enterprise might hinder women's opportunities. And such culture must be transformed. And with an understanding of the challenges, we can make it change. Providing the society with security and fundamental human rights is a prerequisite for the legitimacy and democratic development of any state. The relationship between the majority population and minority groups is the accurate test for a community's will and ability to ensure human rights for everyone. Participation in public life is a human right. Non-participation of women is consequently not democracy. Women make up half of the population, and it's essential that this is reflected also in the country's leadership. Women may address important issues men would not have thought of. There is a need to realize that it is in the male leader's best interest to include the women. One needs to include women in decision-making also because, as many already know, they may offer a different and probably astonishing perspective on issues in question. Democracy is complicated, time-consuming, and does not only involve avenues of change, but with joint efforts supporting the people who are pro-change, we believe the progress towards democracy is possible. With collaborative, equal, and encouraged efforts, enhancement of democracy can be made, and change can be achieved. And there is progress going on. Over the last about 25 years, the number of more or less democratic political systems and nations have been doubled. But still also in countries that we consider to be democracies, women do not have equal opportunities to participate. And it's not a full democracy before there are equal rights and opportunities for men and women to take also leading positions in a political system. Change does not happen by itself. Awareness of inequality and for what needs to be done, however, will at least bring us halfway there. It's long overdue. Thank you.
Oslo Center for Peace and Human Rights U.S. Foundation Executive Director Orland Kringsted on setting the stage for dignity and empowerment. One of the core principles, as you've heard this morning, of the Oslo Center for Peace and Human Rights is empowerment of women. In fact, there's a paragraph in their strategic plan that speaks to gender engagement as a core value in all of their projects. In planning our conference, we wanted to combine the core values and the principles of the Oslo Center for Peace and Human Rights with a conference here. One of our panelists this morning, Ingrid Stange, is the founder of a remarkable organization in Norway called Partnership for Change. And each year, Partnership for Change and the Oslo Center work together to present a conference on issues facing our globe. This year, one of the components of Partnership for Change conference was dignity and empowerment, the role of women in leadership. We wanted to bring that back to Minneapolis, some portion of that, and present it to our friends here. In doing so, we wanted to find a way to link the core values and principles of the Oslo Center together with something local, a local connection. And what we found was the rich culture of agricultural businesses, agribusiness in Minnesota. And here we found Land O'Lakes, General Mills, Cargill, and others, all of whom have remarkable projects going on all over Africa, primarily Kenya, where the Oslo Center is so deeply engaged today. So, hence, we have the conference that we're putting on today and tomorrow at Augsburg College, Dignity and Empowerment, Women as Key to Global Food Security. In a moment, I will have Jana Auna-Deach, the chair of our planning committee, to come up and introduce our first panel. Planning Chair Jana Auna-Deach on setting the stage for dignity and empowerment.
The Fourth World Conference, and we are very excited to present our first panel. Before I introduce our panelists, I do want to recognize the other committee members who are part of the Oslo Center Dignity and Empowerment Committee. We have Kristen Sundt, and if you could please stand when I call your name. Ingunn Henriksen, Antonia Felix, and Karen Gusas. So I want to thank them for their hard work and dedication in helping to put this program together. Before I introduce our esteemed panelists, I would like to share with you a quote from Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., which I think really exemplifies the ideas that we will be discussing as part of the Fourth World Conference and the Dignity and Empowerment Seminar over the next few days. In Washington, D.C. in 1959, Dr. King issued this challenge: make a career of humanity. Commit yourself to the noble struggle for equal rights. You will make a greater person of yourself, a greater nation of your country, and a finer world to live in. Each of our four panelists has taken this challenge and has really brought forth in their own specific expertise this noble challenge and commitment. You heard Dr. Meyer's wonderful introduction of Mr. Bondevik. As you know, he's the former Prime Minister of Norway. He is a visionary who had the idea of a world at peace and a world where each individual had the assurance and protection of his or her human rights. And out of that, he created the Oslo Center for Peace and Human Rights, where they work for democracy building and to bring political stability to developing countries. We also have with us today Denise O'Brien, who has dedicated her career to the learning, teaching, development, and implementation of sustainable agricultural practices and policies. She has worked to empower women in the area of agriculture. She was appointed by the Obama administration to serve as an agricultural advisor in Afghanistan, and she will share some of those experiences with us today. And we are pleased to have her, and she was also, or is also, the founder of Women, Food, and Agriculture Network. So we are very excited to have her with us today to share her story. We also have a prominent human rights attorney, Vigdis Vevstad, who has advocated tirelessly for the rights of refugees and those seeking asylum and protection. And she has served with the United Nations High Council for Refugees. She has also served with the Norwegian Council for Refugees, and she has advocated tirelessly for human rights for all. So we are so pleased to have her with us today. And then last but not least, we have with us Ingrid Stange. And Orlin gave a brief introduction. She really is a visionary in the area of philanthropy and business, promoting corporate responsibility. She started Partnership for Change, where she has promoted the ideals of social entrepreneurship and corporate responsibility. She also recently founded the Aung San Suu Kyi World Freedom Fund, among her many, many, many list of accomplishments. She has worked for women empowerment, youth empowerment, and we are so excited to have her with us today. I will ask the panel to come forward at this point, and Mr. Bondevik will be our moderator to set the stage for dignity and empowerment.
Former Norwegian Prime Minister and Oslo Center for Peace and Human Rights Norway founder Kjell Magne Bondevik leads and participates in the panel session Setting the Stage for Dignity and Empowerment. For full footage, please go to youtube.com/user/Oslo Center USF.
education is really a source of empowerment of women. And therefore I'm in a way optimistic, because when they are so highly educated, I think that in the longer perspective they will not accept a situation of so strong discrimination as you have in this country and in others as well. So I do hope that education will empower them.
Oslo Center for Peace and Human Rights Norway Board of Trustees member Ingrid Stange participates in the panel discussion, Setting the Stage for Dignity and Empowerment.
I founded Partnership for Change a few years ago to set where we have the vision to see a world where we can all live well together within the limits of our planet. Trying to build the awareness of the need to break down the silos, work together to create the necessary changes. So we have an annual conference where we work with, where we showcase good examples of partnerships for where dignity, empowerment, and the human rights are important issues for the change towards a better society.
Oslo Center for Peace and Human Rights Norway Board of Directors member Vigdis Vevstad participates in the panel session, Setting the Stage for Dignity and Empowerment.
Formal empowerment should not be forgotten. I mean, real empowerment should not be forgotten because of formal empowerment. I think it says the same thing, really. Now, I think this actual implementation of the norms is the real challenge of the world today. How to ensure the implementation of the norms, of the human rights norms worldwide. And this is also why I see the role of civil society as so important. For example, the Oslo Center in its work towards enhancement of human rights and establishment of democracy and democracy building. Also the work of organizations such as Amnesty International and other watchdogs in the NGO. Now, human rights principles include the principle of non-discrimination, we know that. And they also include the right to food. This is part of the rights of economic and social and cultural rights enshrined in the 1966 Covenant from the UN. But we still know that about 800 million people are still hungry. The Covenant says also that the aims of those principles, those legal principles, should be progressively achieved. Now, it's been a long time since 1966. But we saw some figures on the film, and I appreciated seeing also that it is possible to come further. What the Covenant does not say, but what could be added here, is to emphasize the women's role as the main caretakers of the family and therefore of the next generations.
Women Food and Agriculture Network founder Denise O'Brien participates in the panel session, Setting the Stage for Dignity and Empowerment.
I work through Iowa State University, and we bring women farmers over here. I just met several this last week, and from Uganda, and there's many times we go to other countries, and one of the ways that we can support is that I've noticed over my lifetime of travel and visiting with people is to show our support, to know that they're not alone where they're working. You know, substantial change can only happen from within, and from within that country, and from within the communities. And when traditions are so strong in that, it's hope. I have hope that the youth will see and be influenced by, and even in the developed countries, by what changes can be made for their own countries, and the value of women and women's position in food security and in food sovereignty. And, you know, in many instances in the past, our U.S. food aid has been directed towards the men, totally missing the real farmer. That's been changed in some respects, and the aid and technical assistance in that we're giving is now more directed to women. So just the fact that they're recognized as farmers, I think, is a big help from our aid organizations. But that's something that has to happen at a very organic core level, and we can only attempt to influence.
Oslo Center for Peace and Human Rights Norway Board of Trustees member Ingrid Stange leads and participates in the plenary session Business Models for Empowerment. For full footage, please go to youtube.com/user/Oslo Center USF.
More than 100 million children are out of school, and 70% of those children are girls. Every seventh girl in the poor countries is married before she's 18. And 1 out of 4 give birth before they are 18. And no, not before 18, but before 15. And 1 out of every 4 girls give birth before 18. And 3 out of every 5 poor person in the world are women. And as we talked about earlier this morning, we own 1% of the planet, and we do 70% or 60% of the work. And we know also that when a woman earns money in the third world, 70% of that income she gets goes back to the family to raise her children, to give them education, whereas for the men, that's somewhere between 30 and 40%. And we also know that women care more about the environment. When they produce agricultural products, they are more concerned about the long-term quality of the soil, the long-term effect on the planet. And in short, if you know about Vision 2050, I don't know how familiar that is here. Vision 2050 was made by 200 of the largest companies in the world, creating the World Business Council for Sustainable Development. What they have done is they make a vision for what is the world going to look like in 2050 if we don't do major changes. What they say is that if we keep the present level of innovation and the present level of development of population, etc., we will need 2.5 planets in 2050.
Mosaic Mindshare founder Susan Sorensen Langer contributes in the plenary session Business Models of Empowerment.
And the vision is to create a virtuous cycle, to your point. How can we create a multiplier effect? What they've established in their model is a technology, a platform from Salesforce.com so that we can connect people much more readily. It isn't on a one-on-one basis, but a one-to-many. We also have trainings that we're putting on that bring small and growing businesses into that training that might not have one-on-one project assistance, but they're getting trained on how to do different types of corn soy blend, quality training, all sorts of things. So it is one-to-many. But we tell stories here so that you can see the difference of change on one person's life, I guess.
Mm-hmm. I want to...
Land O'Lakes International Development Monitoring, Evaluation and Learning Manager Edna Ogwangi contributes in the plenary session Business Models of Empowerment.
These stakeholders, the governments that we work with, need to understand that it's a partnership between the Western world, the donors who are giving the resources, and for them, they have to play a big role in improving their policies, which are really key to make sure that those policies align and their economic policies, which are not leading other resources outside the development goal.
Roy Wilkins Center for Human Relations and Social Justice Director Samuel L. Myers, Jr. Ensuring racial and ethnic economic equality is up to us.
When we find solutions to racial and ethnic economic inequality, the inherent capacity of those bearing the burdens of that inequality will be revealed. They will no longer be viewed as a problem to be solved. They will be seen as a resource of great potential. It is up to us to demonstrate how that can be done.